The continent of Africa was a very different region to what we know today. Before the arrival of the Europeans to Africa, the continent was made up of largely independent, self-governed kingdoms and empires. These pre-colonial civilizations acquired their territories through century-old battles and defended their territories jealously with mighty military forces and incredible architecture. The landscape of Africa changed for good following the invasion of Africa by the Western superpowers. Africa went from having only 10% of the continent under former European control in 1870 to having 90% of the continent under former European control in 1914, within the space of 45 years. At the Berlin Conference of 1884, the Western European diplomats formally agreed the ownership of the African nations that they had carved out. Redrawing the map of Africa, they created new country boundaries out of existing territories, merging former kingdoms with neighboring rivals based on existing resources, ease of access, etc. The idea of nationalism was introduced by colonial powers. In reality, Africa is a continent of over 2,000 tribes and languages. No other continent of the world shares this same cultural diversity. These tribal differences have been the source of many conflicts and civil wars across the continent, even until present day. In this series, we would like to explore the pre-colonial kingdoms and empires across Africa and the world over. Beginning with one of the wealthiest and most politically advanced civilizations, the Benin Kingdom. If you enjoy and would like to see more of this type of content, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share this video with your networks. The Kingdom of Benin, also referred to as Edo Kingdom or the Benin Empire, was a kingdom that once stood in the southwestern part of the region that is now known as Nigeria. This historical kingdom was formed by the Edo people in the 1200s CE and thrived until 1897 when the British Empire annexed it. It is believed that the Kingdom of Benin emerged from the earlier Edo Kingdom of Igodomigodo, which existed in the 1000s and went on to become one of the most advanced empires in the rainforest regions of West Africa. Its capital was called Edo, currently known as Benin City. Edo was at the center of a complex trading network supervised by the country's king, or Oba, involved in the exchange of goods and services with the Portuguese merchants in search of gold and slaves. Lasting for at least 600 years, the Kingdom of Benin was one of the most powerful and longest-lasting states in West Africa. A series of civil wars in the 19th century contributed to the collapse of the kingdom, which led to its conquest by the British. The Kingdom of Benin has been around since ancient times. It is said to have existed from 355 BC to modern times. The kingdom was well known for its impressive military power, as well as its magnificent bronze, ivory, and iron artifacts. Initially, it consisted of a cluster of towns and villages led by the most senior male member of the community. The smaller towns and villages eventually merged into larger ones for reasons of increased safety and improved economic opportunities. As a result, it later became a kingdom called Igodomigodo and was ruled by the Osigos, kings of the sky. The people of Edo believed that their kings and other authoritative figures descended from the heavens, or more accurately, that God sent them. After the formation of the kingdom, the first Osigo was appointed. He wielded a lot of power and was known for being a good leader. His ruling made him establish trust with his people. In most cases, the Osigo was held by 7 nobles known as Uzama. They helped set up Ubinu, which later became known as Benin City, as their capital or center of government around the year of 1180. During the reign, the Osigo provided each settlement sovereignty, and by the 15th century, Edo territories had been turned into a secured, prosperous, and independent city-state community. The Osigo ruled for a long time before he died, and his eldest son, Ere, took over. As a result, the Osigo dynasty continued for years. In the 12th century, during the last Osigo's rule, a big palace fight broke out, and the only son of the last Osigo the crown prince of Ekala-Deran was sentenced to death because of the first queen, who was barren, deliberately changed an oracle's message to the Osigo. At that time, even though the Osigo had many wives, they could not reproduce. However, the Osigo was fixated on having more male offspring because he was afraid that if something happened to his only son, Ekala-Deran, the family legacy would come to an end. Therefore, he was convinced to consult the oracle in order to discover the root of the problem and perhaps a remedy. So the Osigo went to Esago, the first barren wife, to consult the oracle about the situation. The oracle said that Esago was the reason Osigo's wives could not have children, so he had to be sacrificed to make the gods happy or let Osigo have more children. Instead, Esago changed the message to save her life and blamed the prince. She said that the prince was the problem and had to be killed. Because of what the oracle said, Osigo ordered his son, Prince Ekala-Deran, to be sacrificed. But things turned around when the palace messengers realized that the prince was not guilty. They also knew that he was a great warrior, loved by his people. Because of this, they did not think he could have been the reason why his father did not have more children. Therefore, though the royal order required that the prince be killed, the palace messengers had mercy on him and released him at Uhoton near Benin. After he was set free, the prince made his way to exile in Uhe, Ile-Efe. The people of Ile-Efe embraced him, and after evaluating his personality and potential, they chose to make him their king. It is possible that the oracle of the land was responsible for this forecast. The prophecy was indicated that a mysterious warrior from another land would emerge from the woods and take command of them. The prince then changed his name to Oduduwa and became the first king of Ife. When the last Osigo died, there was no available heir to take over as Osigo, so the Osigo dynasty officially ended. In place of the Osigo, a popular elder was elected as the king of the Edo state and ruled for a while without any issues. However, when he attempted to appoint his son as his successor, it was met with resistance from the other elders who served on the ruling council. At this time, the Edo people feared their kingdom would be chaotic due to misrule. So the people and the royal kingmakers decided that they should search for Osigo's son, Ekala-Deran, who was in exile, to succeed his father as the king of their kingdom and restore the Osigo dynasty. They then contacted the Yoruba ruler, Oduduwa, who resided in the city of Ile-Ife, and requested that he come and lead them. They had no idea that Oduduwa was in fact the son of the previous Osigo, who had been sent into exile. They addressed him in his capacity as a revered and powerful military ally of Igodomigodo, who had previously defended them against various invasions. However, Oduduwa declined to offer himself as a ruler because of his advanced age. Instead, he presented them with his son, Orimiya, as a substitute for himself. Orimiya was relocated to Asama, where a palace was constructed specifically for him. He resided there for several years before being married to the daughter of a local noble, and the couple had a son together. However, throughout this period, the local nobles resisted his foreign form of rule with a great deal of vigor. Orimiya eventually became frustrated with the resistance. He then dubbed Igodomigodo the land of vexation, also known as Ile-Ebinu in his proclamation. This phrase would eventually become translated into the name Ubinu, which would later be given to the land and specifically the city that serves as its capital. Then, Orimiya renounced his title, stating that only a child born on the local soil and raised on the local traditions could govern over the region. After giving up his power, Orimiya made plans for his native-born son, Eweka, to become the new king, and he went back to Yoruba land. However, though Eweka was born and raised in Benin, his father had origins in Ile-Ife. This made him different from the people who worked for him. Throughout Benin's history, a unique part of its identity would be emphasized to show how special this monarch was. This would be the basis for the Benin dynastic myth, which explained why their monarchs had the right to rule. The reign of Eweka marked the commencement of Benin's Oba dynasty, the country's second monarchical regime. They kept much of the same symbolism and positioned themselves as semi-divine figures, similar to how their predecessors did, which marked a return to the norms of the Osigo era. In addition, power was not centralized in the same way as it was in the Osigo's time. The Oba sat at the head of the kingdom and retained nearly total authority, but the everyday governing of the kingdom was largely delegated to local hereditary lords. Because of the Oba's supreme and quasi-divine authority, his approval was required for the nobles to exercise their authority. The nobles were responsible for carrying out the Oba's directives regarding the administration of his domain and the collection of tribute on his behalf. Also, the nobles exercised some influence collectively through the Uzama, which kept the Oba's power in check. To put it bluntly, the Oba dynasty's political structure resembled the Osigo dynasty. In exchange for resources, tributes, and taxes paid to the administrative capital, it provided military and regal protection. The rise of the Benin Kingdom reached its peak when Oba Ewuore took over. Ewuore was born to Prince Ogun, a third-born son of Oba Ohen. During the decades before his leadership, there was a great deal of conflict between the royal house and the Uzama. First, Oba Ohen was dethroned and put to death by stoning by Uzama for ordering the execution of a high-ranking noble. His eldest son, Obeka, succeeded him as ruler of the kingdom. Oba Ebeka also had trouble with the Uzama and engaged in many civil battles with them. Prince Ogun and his younger brother were banished, and another brother, Orobiru, became the new Oba after their father, Obeka's death. Following Orobiru's passing, Ogun's younger brother returned from his self-imposed exile to ascend to the throne, and subsequently traveled back to Ubenu to take the throne through coercion. Later, in 1440, Ogun claimed the throne after so much struggle and took on the regal name Iwaure, which meant trouble has ceased, to commemorate his victory. After Iwaure had succeeded in consolidating the power of the Oba, he would go back to achieve something that would win him the epithet Ewa the Great. The rise of power of Eba Ewuore in the 15th century brought about massive change in many things. First, he reformed how the powers and authority of the Oba were limited and checked by the Uzama. He stripped the Uzama of the authority to check on the Oba's leadership and choosing the next Oba, and instructed the strict primogeniture system in its place. According to this system, the Oba's eldest son would always succeed his father in the position of Oba. Second, the Oba Ewuore instituted sweeping changes to the political framework of the kingdom. Under his leadership, the empire's territory was substantially enlarged and its arts and festivals were supported, and an administrative structure was developed. In addition, he introduced the town chief known as Ihabo Nore and the palace chief known as Ihabo Nogbe. The Oba was personally involved in the appointment process for these administrative arms, and they reported directly to him. In addition, the Oba built the moat system of defense, which included the construction of fortifications and moats in the capital city, which was situated on over 2,485 miles of land. He was responsible for authorizing the construction of the Benin walls, which extended for approximately 6,213 miles and served to demarcate the kingdom's territories. A moat was dug in the middle of the city throughout the construction process. This moat served as a fortification and provided access to the city's capital. This structure took decades to finish and was, at the time, the greatest earthwork project ever undertaken anywhere in the globe. The kingdom's capital was also reconstructed, and between the years 1440 and 1470, Oba Ewuore transformed the Benin Empire into a fortress that was enclosed by walls and surrounded by moats. From this stronghold, the King of Benin launched his military campaigns and expanded the kingdom. During the reign of Aba Ower the Great, the Kingdom of Benin flourished to its fullest potential in terms of size, strength, and culture. The Kingdom of Benin was famous for its intricate brass art, extensive earthwork system, and a complex political hierarchy. A few structures that may date back to around AD 900 to 1200 were built in the kingdom style of the architecture and have survived for hundreds of years. The intricate floor designs of these enormous complexes appear to be based on the traditional social organization of the kingdom. Also, a structure called an impluvium was used to collect and store rainwater. In the palaces of the nobles, there was a structure known as a complovium that directed rainfall into an impluvium. This was done to allow light air to pass through the walls of these buildings, as there were no windows in these kinds of buildings. In addition, an archaeological investigation done in the middle of the 20th century has shown that Benin City had edge-laid post-herd sidewalks. These pavements have been dated to the period around or before the 14th century. In addition, the architectural designs of the Edo Kingdom can be seen in the walls of Benin, which are a collection of earthworks consisting of banks and ditches. The military of Benin was known for its strict discipline. The Oba served as the head of the army and gave orders to its generals. Before the 15th century, that army prevailed in numerous conflicts and grew in size, despite not having access to guns. They were armed with a wide array of weaponry, including crossbows, swords, bows, spears, assegas, and poisoned arrows. The king's palace contained a vast stockpile of iron weaponry, and this is where the war arsenals were kept. The Benin warriors relied on a large shield for defense, one that was capable of providing full protection to a kneeling adult male of average size. Helmets were also required as headwear for senior officials and warriors who had been decorated. After each battle, any arrows that had not been used were sent back to the king's arsenal, and new arrows were crafted and poisoned in their place. The warriors brought protecting arms and amulets with them to war and wore them on their arms. Each warrior was equipped with a bell, a gogo. The clanging of these bells during the war motivated the warriors psychologically. Ewuare stretched Benin's power to the surrounding territories, bringing, in addition, Edo and non-Edo people, and expanding the frontiers of the empire to the shore. This allowed Benin to become an empire. In addition to this, they built a culture that was quite artistic. This was made clear by the well-known artifacts they produce out of bronze, iron, and ivory. The most well-known of them all was the Queen Idia mask, also known as the Festak mask. She was a queen mother. Because of their abilities, the artists were given exclusive apartments in the capital city and received support from the royal family. By the end of the 15th century, when the Europeans first came to Western Africa, Benin was already a highly developed, prosperous monarchy with a strong military and a well-organized bureaucracy. Uware was succeeded by a long line of Obas, including Ozuola the Conqueror and Isigi, who ruled up to the late 16th century. These Obas established and enjoyed good relations with Europeans, especially the Portuguese, which assisted in encouraging trade with Europe. The Benin Kingdom reached the pinnacle of its political and economic supremacy during the 15th and 16th centuries. The Portuguese, who were the first Europeans to develop trade relations with the Kingdom of Benin, was a particularly important trading partner for the kingdom in its commercial dealings with other European nations. The British and the Dutch followed suit throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. The kingdom emerged as a significant major point of interaction for Europeans in West Africa as a result of its role as a regional middle trader, not only between numerous kingdoms in the region, but also between West Africans and Europeans. This is because many of the visitors and merchants who passed through the region were impressed by the magnificence of Benin. Benin traded goods such as pepper, cloth, ivory, and bronze, and sold slaves. In return, the Portuguese traded manillas, which were bars of brass, copper items, firearms, and gunpowder. Because of this trade, the kingdom was able to amass a great deal of wealth. The exchange between the Kingdom of Benin and the Portuguese led the Benin Empire to depend on European firearms to conquer other kingdoms. When King Manuel I of Portugal became aware of the desperate need of the Edo people to obtain firearms so they could maintain their military superiority over their neighbors, he threatened to end the trade in firearms unless the people of Benin converted to Christianity. This was done in an effort to convince the Benin people to accept Christianity. However, this attempt was unsuccessful because the Portuguese needed slaves supplied by the kingdom. The Kingdom of Benin started to decline in power in the late 16th century through to the 19th century, but remained a significant trading destination. The decline was influenced by several factors, including internal conflicts and the arrival of Europeans in the region. When the European traders and explorers arrived in the kingdom, they disrupted the robust economy that was based on trade by introducing new items and technology that the kingdom was not prepared for. Towards the end of the 19th century, the British, who had gradually established control over much of the surrounding territories, decided to include the Kingdom of Benin within its protectorate, but the kingdom resisted this idea. At the time, the British had become tired of the Oba's protectionist control over trade. Hostility between the two increased, and as a result, the kingdom gradually stopped exporting its resources until they could only export palm oil. The British government dispatched envoys to negotiate, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Another factor that contributed to the decline of the Benin Empire was internal conflicts and rivalries within the kingdom. The Oba and some of the officials of the kingdom were not in terms, and this led to lack of unity. As a result, it weakened the central government and ultimately made it easier for Europeans to take control of the kingdom. In 1892, during the reign of Oba of Antamwem, it became very difficult for him to resist the growing pressure from Britain. The British managed to convince the Oba and some of his officials to sign a treaty, expanding British influence over the empire. In January 1897, Vice-Consul James R. Phillips embarked on a voyage to Benin to put more pressure on the Oba to accept more treaties. He did this without permission from the British Protectorate and against the advice of high-ranking chiefs of the Edo Kingdom. Earlier, he had been told not to go into the kingdom because it was during an important ancestral ritual festival in Edo land where foreigners were not allowed in. Several generals from Benin caught up with his group without the Oba's permission or knowledge. They attacked, killing 8 British people. This resulted in the Brits launching a punitive expedition against the kingdom on February 18, 1897, under Admiral Sir Harry Rawson's command. They successfully captured the city and proceeded to loot its treasures. They then destroyed it, leaving very little remaining. This greatly weakened the kingdom's military and economic power. Benin City would be rebuilt, but not in its original style. Today, a few traces remain of the spectacular city which once stood on the site. The decline did not result in the complete removal of the monarchy, and to this day, descendants of Benin's royal dynasty continue to use the title of Oba. In contemporary Nigeria, the Obas are called upon to serve in advisory functions and for the state, as well as to preside over religious ceremonies. However, they no longer rule the people. This brings us to the end of our history lesson on the Benin Kingdom. If you've enjoyed this video, please share with your networks and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to see more content like this.